So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's live session. We are privileged to discuss and share more about the Sahel and West Africa Club and the amazing work they've been able to do. And of late, there was some good collaboration with Digital Africa, where we'll have a presentation from the group. And then also we'll have a presentation from our very own Mpho, who will be able to show some of the methodologies that they've been able to replicate in Digital Africa, especially using the amazing data sets, including Africa Police and name it. Yog, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Kenneth, and welcome. So I just want to set the scene before giving the floor to Paul to actually present the tools and speak about why we care about tree cover mapping in urban areas. And I'm going to share some insights from the analysis of almost 7,000 cities across the continent. For the people that are interested in going in deep about this analysis, you can follow the link that is on the screen now. That is the analysis that we published 2 years ago. And I'm going to publish here some to tell you here some insights about an update of this analysis with new data. So we managed to map tree cover in cities across Africa, almost 7,000 cities using the urban agglomerations boundaries from the Africa Police database that we produce at SWAC. And with the land cover data that we have also from the ESA, European Space Agency, that is open and available to us. So the first insight is that 78% of the cities fall short of the 30% tree canopy cover recommended by the 300 rule. And this rule is the one that says that every person should see at least 3 trees from its home. Every neighborhood should have at least 30% of tree canopy cover. And every household should be at least at 300 meters or less from a urban green space of quality. And here we are only estimating the total tree cover of the cities. And we find that 78% of the urban agglomerations in our database fall short of this rule. And this is important because when the cities develop, they often do it by infill and become more compact. And this reduces tree cover, and this in turn could increase the heat risk because the tree covers deliver a very important ecosystem service that is called the urban green space cooling effect. And this could be compromised when we don't have any tree cover in our surroundings. And the other finding is that proximity matters because in the cities, especially in the West African region and the Sahel region, that is the focus of our group, most urban population lives too far from the trees or the tree patches of enough size to benefit from their cooling effects. So we have here in our screen Bamako in Mali, Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso, Niamey in Niger, and Katsina in Nigeria. And what we see is that very high density population areas are too far from the trees to actually benefit from the cooling effects. And this is important because we have seen the trends in recent years are that, for example, 2023 and 2024 were the most number of days with extreme heat, that is with temperatures about 35 degrees, are going to be significantly increasing from now to the end of the century. So having more trees in our cities is very important, and to be able to take action and to target our intervention is very important to map tree cover and to map also the population to actually see where to intervene and also to track the progress over time. And this is why we think that collaborating with the Digital Africa and working on these tools is very important because we can empower local stakeholders and local actors to do this analysis by themselves, to track how they are progressing or not regarding this very important topic of having urban forests and tree cover in their own cities. and allow communities and allow especially the small and intermediary cities that don't have enough resources to have these tools to actually do this kind of analysis and push for change. So for the people that are interested, thank you very much. You can also visit our platform that is called Mapping Africa Transformations. In the climate section, we have more information regarding green spaces. We have information for all of the urban agglomerations across the continent for different dates. You can compare the answers for cities and compare the different dates. And we also have, like I said at the beginning of the presentation, our report that you can also consult using following those links. Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to Mpho so they can tell you about the exact how to access these amazing tools. Thank you very much, Kenneth.
You're most welcome. Once you stop sharing, Mpho will share. Thank you so much. And your colleague Brele just joined us. Prego, welcome so much to our session.
Good day, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, Jorge, for that nice introduction to the Digital Earth Africa, not the Digital Earth Africa platform, but rather setting the scene for the work that we are working on together. So my name is Mpho Sadiki, and I'm an Earth observation data scientist at Digital Earth Africa. And I'm excited today to present on the approaches that we've developed or worked with the Sahel and West Africa Club for estimating urban green space and tree cover. So in this presentation, I'll introduce the green space indicators and tree cover data that the Sahel and West Africa Club has shared with us to host, along with associated notebooks in the Digital Earth Africa Sandbox. So we'll explore how these datasets and tools can support monitoring and decision-making for sustainable urban planning. Before diving into the details of urban green space and tree cover, I would like to briefly introduce Digital Earth Africa and its role in supporting data-driven decision-making across the continent. Digital Earth Africa is built on a clear vision, and that is to provide a routine, reliable, and operational service that uses Earth observation to deliver decision-ready products. These products empower policymakers, scientists, and the private sector, as well as civil society, to address social, environmental, and economic challenges while fostering innovation across sectors. And our mission is to process openly accessible and freely available data to produce insights tailored to Africa's unique needs. So through close collaboration with the broader African community, we ensure that we produce products and services that are responsive to regional priorities and challenges. Additionally, we focus on leveraging and strengthening existing capacity to enhance the use of Earth observation across the continent. And when it comes to our governance, we are guided by 4 key principles, which are open and free data, and operational service, accountability and transparency, as well as diversity and inclusion. So these are the principles that ensure that DE Africa remains trusted, accessible, and impactful for the continent. Digital Earth Africa focuses on 5 key thematic areas, each addressing critical challenges across the continent, and these areas guide the development of decision-ready products that support sustainable development and resilience. As you can see on the screen, these include agriculture and food security, water resources and flood risks, land degradation, urbanization, and coastal erosion. So these are the thematic areas that demonstrate how Earth observation data can be applied to real-world challenges, ensuring that decision makers have the information they need to act. Now on to why we're here today. So just to give you a background of, and also building on what Jorge presented earlier, just a background on the urbanization and how that impacts the environment. The way things are currently, urbanization is reshaping cities across the world and obviously across Africa with rapidly growing urban populations. By 2050, Africa's urban population is expected to double, reaching 1.4 billion people. This rapid expansion brings both challenges and opportunities. And as we can see on this figure from the OECD, it highlights that the scale of urban growth in Africa, showing that by 2050, the continent will have 159 urban agglomerations with more than 1 million inhabitants and 17 megacities with over 10 million people. And this is only second to one other continent, which is Asia. As cities grow, they face increasing pressure on resources and infrastructure, making it difficult to provide essential services. And urban living also reduces access to green spaces and nature, which is crucial for well-being and environmental balance. Many urban areas are also experiencing higher levels of air and noise pollution, which affects public health. And additionally, climate change is worsening environmental challenges such as extreme heat and water shortages. So to ensure that cities remain livable, sustainable, and resilient, proactive planning is essential. And investing in green infrastructure and sustainable development will be the key to managing this growth effectively. As I mentioned earlier, rapid urbanization in Africa is putting immense pressures on cities. And to address these challenges and create healthier, more sustainable urban environments, urban green spaces are becoming increasingly important. So what exactly are urban green spaces? These are vital components of city environments, and they're natural or semi-natural areas within urban settings that provide a wide range of environmental, social, and economic benefits. They help improve air quality, promote biodiversity, provide recreational spaces, and also enhance climate resilience by reducing urban heat and managing stormwater. And urban green spaces come in many forms, and these include parks and gardens, street trees and green corridors, urban forests and woodlands, wetlands and riversides and lake shores, as well as green roofs and community gardens. These spaces play a very critical role in making cities more livable, sustainable, and resilient. So with that being said, today I will highlight some of the work we've been doing with the Sahel and West Africa Club team on urban green space analysis in Africa. So the OECD and Sahel West Africa Club team created a data set of green space indicators and shared it with us at Digital Earth Africa to host on the Digital Earth Africa platform, which will further enable further analysis and access to this data by a wider community. This data set is built using two key sources, the Africa Polis urban agglomerations from 2015 and 2020, which define urban areas based on a consistent methodology that identifies areas with more than 10,000 people where buildings are spaced less than 200 meters apart. And this is a data set from the OECD. And the ESA World Cover 2020 and 2021 layers. So these are global layers. And in this case, also, we could consider them continental layers that give land cover and give us the ability to actually extract information on the types of green spaces that are available. The result is two green space indicator layers, one for each Africa Polis layer. So there's one for 2015 and 2020, and both use the 2020 and the 2021 ESA World Cover data sets to measure the total area of grasslands, trees, and shrublands within each Africa Polis defined urban boundary. And the percentage of green space is then calculated by comparing the total green area to the urban footprint. So by us hosting this data set on the Digital Earth Africa platform, we provide decision makers, researchers, and urban planners with an accessible tool for monitoring green space trends across Africa. As we are making this data set available on the Digital Earth Africa platform, you can easily access it through the Digital Earth Africa maps, which allows users to easily visualize and explore data. For those who are not familiar with the maps, this is a website for map-based interaction with the Digital Earth Africa products and services. And through the maps, we aim to provide users with tools to explore our data, products, and visualize the African continent and understand its geographic diversity and how it changes over time. So if you were to go to the Digital Earth Africa maps, I've included the link to the maps there, which is just maps.digitalearth.africa, or you can just scan that QR code there. It will take you to the map platform. And you'll see that there's two categories, which are the internal Digital Earth Africa products, which are products that we create ourselves at Digital Earth Africa, but also another set of products which we call external, which are the data sets that we host from our partners, such as the Sahel and West Africa Club. And there you will see under the external data sets, we have the Africa Polis data with urban green spaces or green space indicators, where you'll find the two layers, one for 2015 and one for 2020. And I've showcased an example there of how you can actually see what is represented within that data set. So when it comes to the notebooks that I mentioned earlier, these are found within the Digital Earth Africa sandbox environment. And for those who are not aware, this is an interactive environment where users can access, modify, and run Jupyter notebooks for various analyses. And these notebooks are pre-configured to work with the green space indicators data and provide a starting point for you to explore the data that I was just explaining. So if you are interested, please scan the code or go to sandbox.digitalearth.africa, and there you would be able to register if you have not, and gain access to the sandbox where all these notebooks that I will be going through now are included. On to the next slide. Another important thing about all the notebooks that we make available on the Digital Earth Africa platform is that they are hosted or available openly and freely through a Jupyter Hub repository. And the links that you see here on the screen are the links to those specific notebooks, but not to the sandbox, but to the repository that we have available on GitHub. So there's actually 3 notebooks that we're going to look at today. And the first one is, the description of it says the OECD SWAC Africa Polis with green space indicators. And this is a datasets notebook. If you're familiar with the sandbox, you know that dataset notebooks are just notebooks that allow you to, or introduce you to a dataset. So they introduce you to the dataset in terms of how to load it, how to plot it, and basically just how to access it from the Digital Earth Africa platform. And the other 2 notebooks are real-world examples. So these are examples of how you could either use the data or you could use the methodology that was used to create the data and also do additional analysis. So I will first go through that first notebook, and then I'll obviously go on to the second and the third notebook on the approach, as well as using Sentinel-2 annual geomads for mapping urban tree extent. So this is the first notebook that we have available. As I already mentioned, this notebook is a dataset notebook. So it doesn't necessarily showcase any sort of analysis, but rather showcases how you can load the data for a given area and plot the output of that dataset. So if you go on the sandbox and you go under the data sets, you will find the notebook in that area. I'll showcase this a little bit later on when I do a live demonstration from the sandbox. And this notebook is pretty simple. Obviously, as with all of our notebooks, you will get a background of what the notebook is, why we've created it, what you're likely to expect. And in terms of what the user would be expected to bear in mind is that you have the ability to change the location, because these urban agglomerations with the green spaces are for the entire continent. You would be able to query for most parts of the continent and get an output. And that's where we see, let me see if I can put on a pointer. That's where we see now there's a section where we select a location, and there's obviously markdown and comments that help you decide on whether or not you want to use a point and a buffer, or you want to load an area of interest for you to be able to get all the urban agglomerations that exist within that area of interest that you have selected. So that's basic. That's the basics of that notebook. And this is what you would expect in terms of an output. So once you've selected your urban agglomerations, you can either select one or multiples. That's up to you. But if you've selected one, you'll be able to see that urban agglomeration with its population plotted there and see a comparison of the ESA World Cover 2020 and the World Cover 2021. And then see the urban green space and tree cover comparisons for those 2 years. And as you can see here, I am doing that for the 2020 layer. As I mentioned before, there is the 2015 layer, so based on the 2015 urban agglomerations, and the 2020 layer based on the 2020 urban agglomerations. So for this particular instance or example, I'm just showcasing it for the 2020. But this is something that you would be able to do for many agglomerations that exist within the Africa Polis dataset. As I also mentioned, you can do for multiples, and this is an example of the same thing where you have two and you just plot them. So this notebook is just for that, just to showcase how the data looks or what the data provides to you in terms of information. And one thing I'd like to highlight that maybe you would want to know, this is also included in the notebook. I'll show this later, but key observations, if you see an increase, it might indicate an improvement in vegetation and potential reforestation efforts, but a decrease may suggest that there's probably urban expansion, deforestation, and or land use changes. And if they're consistent, you might assume that the vegetation is stable. So that is the first notebook. And like I said, it's a dataset notebook. Once you go through it, you'll see that it's just that. It shows you how to access the data within the sandbox. The next notebook is actually quite interesting because we've taken the methodology that the Sahel and West Africa Club used to create the green space indicators that I've just showcased and translated that into a notebook within the real-world examples on the sandbox. So basically, we're saying for all the urban agglomerations or for areas that are not included within the Africa Polis dataset, you would essentially be able to have the same output by applying this methodology or this approach that we have translated thanks to the OECD SWAC team being so generous to share the methodology. And as with every other notebook we have on the Digital Earth Africa platform, we have a background. So we explain to you there that this is just a translation of the approach that was used to create the previous data set that I was just talking about to enable users to apply it to an urban agglomeration that does not exist within that data set. And once again, you would be able to then choose an area of interest, either point and a buffer, or upload a GIS file such as a GeoJSON or a shapefile, and then that approach that we've translated, and you would be able to get that same kind of output that you would from the original data set. Sorry. So we've created this notebook, and this notebook, when you go through it, you'll see that you'll be able to pick an area of interest and even pick from the urban agglomerations that are existing within the Africa Polis dataset, if you'd like. But the whole point is we want to use Sentinel-2, which is 10 meters, to then try and get an idea of the changes or the extent of tree cover within an urban area using a thresholding approach that I will explain in the next slide. So with this notebook, which we call Urban Tree Mapping, we basically use NDVI with two separate thresholding approaches. So, NDVI goes from -1 to +1, with the values on the positive end likely to be vegetation, and with vegetation density or vegetation health increasing with the number, and the values lower or towards -1 are other land uses, which might be water, bare soil, and the likes. So with the NDVI, what we've done is we obviously calculate NDVI for a number of annual geomats. So for instance, we started 2017, and the most recent one is currently 2022, but these will be updated to obviously be up to 2024. But you calculate the NDVI. And the first kind of thresholding that we do there is to differentiate vegetation from non-vegetation land use, or land cover rather. And for that, we used a method that was highlighted in a paper that I've included here, which assumes that pixels with an NDVI less than the median minus the distance from the median to the 95th percentile were non-vegetation pixels. Once we have just those set of pixels that we are considering vegetation, we then went into the Otsu method of thresholding, and we use a multi-level one to kind of just determine the thresholds within that particular image, or within that particular image's NDVI values that we've associated with vegetation, to say the lower, or with the three classes that we create from the two thresholds, low vegetation would be associated with the lower values of the NDVI. So we're thinking these are things like areas with very minimal vegetation, so almost like in the urban infrastructure or barren land. But then the middle class would be the moderate vegetation, where we're looking at things like shrublands and grasslands. But the higher values, so in the upper end of the threshold, would be areas that we would potentially associate with tree cover, which we're targeting in this particular case. All of this is explained in the notebook. Once you go through it, you would be able to see that. But this is just an example of when you have the distribution of the NDVI values after you've identified what we would think are vegetation values, which in this case go from zero, just almost zero, just above zero, to about 0.7. And the Otsu thresholding methodology then goes and picks up those changes in the values to try and determine where the cutoffs between low, moderate, and high vegetation are. And you would be able to then get a time series in terms of extent of tree cover. So what I will do now is just do a very quick live demonstration. It won't be too in-depth, but just to showcase that these notebooks do exist, and they are in the Digital Earth Africa sandbox. And if you would like to, please go and have a look at them. So let me just stop sharing and share a different page. I just want to make sure that you can see the correct screen with the sandbox open. Great, thank you. So for those who are new to the Digital Earth Africa sandbox, when you register and open it, it will look something like this. where you would have a few folders and within them you have pre-written code that you can explore. If you're completely new, I would suggest you go through the beginner's guide, which is also the same folder that you would go through if you are going through the introduction to the Digital Earth Africa sandbox course. But you also see that there's a data sets folder. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a folder that contains notebooks that have to do with all the data sets that we have available within the Digital Earth Africa Data Cube, or that we index or make available. And with that, these notebooks will allow you to just get familiar with the data and figure out how to load it, how to interact with it. So I'll first go through that notebook that I spoke about, which is the Africa Polis with Urban Green Spaces Indicators notebook, which is found in that folder. And you'll see there's obviously a description of what the notebook is about, some citations, some links for you to read further. And if you've ever interacted with the Digital Earth Africa platform, you know that there's comments and markdown everywhere. So we try as much as possible to tell you what you can expect or what certain cells are doing. And the first cell will probably always be you loading the packages, then establishing that connection with the data cube, and then selecting your area of interest, which in this case, we've selected Kumasi in Ghana. And you can see that there's multiple ways to actually select that location, which are included here. You can either use a point and a buffer, or you load a shapefile or a GJSON file. Thereafter, once you've selected your area of interest, what the code then does is it pulls all the urban agglomerations that intersect with that area of interest. And we can see that there's actually quite a few that intersect with that area of interest. So it's not just one that you would be interacting with. And you can also plot it to see that there's multiples of them, and you can see their population sizes indicated as well. What you can then do is also plot them on an interactive map that you can zoom in and out of. And when you hover over them, you see those attributes that are included, the green space indicator attributes as well. And the next thing you would do, if you were only interested in a single agglomeration, you can select it. In this case, I've selected Kumasi, and then I've gone ahead and plotted that information that relates to Kumasi. And the same can be done if you're interested in multiple agglomerations. As you can see here, I've added multiples, and I've gone ahead, done the same thing, and plotted them there. So that's just the first notebook, which is the data sets, just shows you how you can interact and what the data sets actually look like, so you can play around and see if it exists for your area of interest, or what that information actually is. And we also include a little bit of markdown that tells you how you could possibly interpret the final plot, but that's just obviously a suggestion. The second and third notebook exist in the real world examples. And this is where most of the fun within the sandbox happens. So these are notebooks that we've written that cover a range of thematic areas, real life applications. And those two notebooks can be found in here. We'll see there's one called Urban Green Space. This is the one that translates that approach that the Sahel and West Africa Club team used to actually create the green space indicators, and then the urban tree extent, which is then using the Sentinel-2 annual geomads to create those, to get an idea of the tree extent. So I'll first go through the urban green space notebook. As with the other notebooks, there's a background. You load the packages that you need. You establish your connection with the data cube, and you define your area of interest. For this particular example, you can either use a point or use a shapefile, but also you can select Let me just go back up. Let me see what this is actually plotting. Let me run it quickly. But yeah, so you can choose your point and boundary around it, or you can do a shapefile or a GeoJSON, and then you can perform your zonal statistics. Remember, I said this particular notebook is for you to be able to use that same approach that was used to create that data set on an urban agglomeration that does not exist within the data set. So that's why you'd be able to either point to one or load one. And in this particular example, this is where I've chosen, and we've explained everything, how you can perform the zonal statistics. So this is a section of the notebook that performs the statistics on your area of interest using the 2020 and 2021. So if you have multiples, it will actually loop through the different urban agglomerations that you have and calculate frequency histograms for the different land covers that exist within the ESA world cover data. So what I mean is you'd be able to get the fractions for the trees, the shrublands, the grass, the cropland, all the different classes that exist. But of course, you are only interested in the green space and tree cover fractions. So these first three, tree cover, shrubland, and grassland, make up the green space. And that's what you would then use to plot your final output in that plot. And now to quickly go through the last notebook, which is the urban tree extent. This one is obviously a bit different because we are loading the data from the Sentinel-2 data. The background is the same in terms of there being information that tells you why we're creating that. You load the packages, you establish the connection to the data cube, you select your area of interest. And here you can either use your own area of interest or alternatively select from the Africa-Polis agglomerations. So you can do your tree cover extent. This is just to plot on an interactive map. And then to calculate, obviously, you need to pull the data. And in this case, it's the Sentinel-2 annual geomedians. We only need a few of the layers of the bands within there. And this is just a plot, an RGB plot of one of the images in that timestamp, in those timestamps. You calculate NDVI. And like I said, we determine the NDVI threshold for vegetation classification first. So you would get something like this, where you get the NDVI and the vegetation area for each of biomass available. And then you move on to the L2 thresholding. You determine low, moderate, and high vegetation, which would then allow you to plot the graph and the tree extent, and then take it further to plot the tree area covered. You could even take it a step further to do a change detection, which is something I've already thought about doing or incorporating into this notebook to show the spatial change in terms of where the trees are lost or the trees are gained based on this analysis. So because of time, I'll stop here with the sandbox, but I see there's a question here before I stop. What do I do when I want my maps to be visualized in animation mode? There's actually a few notebooks that do animations that you could look at. So if you go to frequently used code, you could do an animated time series or something like that. But there is a few notebooks that I could ask Dr. Mubea to share that you could look at. But of course, if it's something that you're not sure of doing, we can help you create an animation for whatever notebook or output that you would have. Okay, so please allow me to go back to my presentation so I don't run out of time. And actually, so yeah, that was the live demonstration. And I would just like to end with this slide. I've only scratched the surface in terms of what is possible. And we're obviously going to build on this with the Sahel and West Africa Club and create more tools and methodologies and algorithms that allow us to guide planning in terms of urban planning that will allow cities to be more resilient in the face of climate change. So I just want to highlight that the applications are many when it comes to EO and green space indicators. And you can think of things like creating maps and inventories, monitoring and assessing and quantifying benefits such as sequestration, mitigation of flooding. The applications are many, and you would be able to do that with EO. So that's what I would like to leave you with in terms of this work. But of course, Digital Earth Africa has training courses, which you can take to introduce yourself to the Digital Earth Africa platform. So please feel free to interact with those. They're self-paced, they're free and fully online, and you can get a certificate of participation at the end. And you can also connect with Digital Earth Africa. That's just a link, or the QR code is a link to our website where you can find out more about Digital Earth Africa. But of course, we have these live sessions every week. This week was in English, which means we'll have the same one next week in French. So if you're comfortable with French, please join us again next week. But you can sign up for those and also sign up to get our newsletters. But please feel free to reach out to us at any time. And all of this would not be possible without our funders and partners. So I'd just like to acknowledge them as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mpho.